So how long does it take to read a face? Turns out it's about 170 milliseconds, just under 2/10 of a second. And nearly everything that we do when we're driving is in the same time scale, unless we choose otherwise. So today I want to talk a little bit about automaticity. And automaticity is one of the very first of the mental frameworks. It's the number one. And the reason why it's first is because what you do when you're driving is so highly rehearsed and trained, you really don't think about it unless you choose to think about it. And that's the difference between a 2/10 of a second thought or a 2/10 of a second response and a half a second response. So you can change those automatic responses, but it takes longer. And you wouldn't think that half a second is that much longer, but in brain terms, it's forever. And that's why it feels so hard to make those kinds of changes. So if you decide all of a sudden you're a person who doesn't typically use your blinker, like most of the people in Florida, and you decide that you are going to do better and you're going to intentionally use your blinker every single time you need to, is that going to be a 2/10 of a second choice or a half a second choice? Until it becomes automatic, it's a half a second choice. But the fact that you made the choice before the trip started means that that half a second choice has a fighting chance, because those 2/10 of a second choices happen without your conscious thought. It takes half a second to get to conscious thought, more like 3/10 of a second, but it's in that range. So if you're going to change what you do when you drive, you have to make an intentional choice to use the prefrontal lobe, which is the executive function part of your brain. It sits right up here in the front of your head, to actually engage that in the choices that you make as you're driving. If you don't, what will happen as you're driving gets run by the limbic system, which sits basically behind your ear and in the middle. So right between your ears, right dead center in the middle. The part of your brain that actually sees faces is over here on the left side, if I remember right. And it sits like right behind your ear. All of those things happen. Your reflexes, your trained responses to the built environment all happened at that 2/10 of a second range. If you're going to change them, you have to make an intentional choice to bypass those reflexive responses, and that takes about half a second. So it can be done. Like, for instance, I was talking with a friend of mine at TRB, Brooke Struby, and she still works for Federal Highways, training people on how to create safe systems. And at one point, she just made a conscious choice that she was not going to speed anymore. Now, in Florida, that feels a little bizarre because everybody speeds. But she basically came to the conclusion that if she was going to be talking about safety to people all over the world, that she probably needed to be a good example of what that looked like. Over time, that's become a habit. And she tells me that her drives are much more relaxed than they used to be. She's very calm. She just basically sets her cruise control when she's on the highway and hangs out over in the right lane with everybody else who's going the speed limit. And she gets there when she gets there. That didn't happen overnight, and she still gets a lot of pressure from people who come up behind her on occasion. So she still has to make an intentional choice not to go faster than the speed limit. Those are half-second choices. But they're half-second choices that you can make. One of the wild things that we don't often think about is that when you're interacting with other people, reading faces is a 2/10 of a second activity. And that 2/10 of a second activity shifts everything. It shifts the way that you show up as a driver. It shifts the way you see yourself. So when you're interacting with other people, You're going to call yourself a jerk if you act like a jerk. This is normal. But if you behave normally, or if you respond to people in a more relaxed, calm way, you're going to pat yourself on the back for doing that. And that's a really important distinction, because it's not just the people around you that are governing your behavior. It's your own internal self-image. That really is what changes the way you drive when you're in an environment like the one I'm sitting in right now. The people that are going by are not going very fast, maybe 10, 12 miles an hour. Occasionally they'll go by a little faster, but not much. And that's great. But it takes an environment where you're face to face with bicyclists and walkers and people who are just hanging out getting ice cream for your behavior to really shift without you thinking about it. Because the behavior you get in this environment, the attentive, engaged, 0.2 of a second response that you get here, is exactly the kind of response that we keep hoping we'll get everywhere else. Why do we get it here? Because those 0.2 of a second responses are tied into seeing faces, not seeing signs, or seeing striping, or looking at the roadway. All of those things are very different when you're in a roadway dominant environment, an environment that's dominated by driving. So I'm here today out in downtown Winter Garden. I suspect I'm going to try to start having office hours in Winter Garden downtown. So if anybody wants to come and talk shop, you are always welcome. And I would love to see you. So until next week, have a great time and think about what you're doing when you're driving, if you've got a half a second.